stream in, because the way this thing works usually is that what you do is you have the participants that have been waiting in the ante room, in the ante chamber, that are now streaming in. And as I mentioned, in principle, there are 280 people registered. How many of them show up is about, you know, the Brussels rule is about 65-35. So we're waiting for a few people to come in. It's about up to about 100. I think the panelists can see that, and then we'll wait we'll get started.
Excellent.
Ah, Peter, good to see you. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, very good. So you can hear us well. All right, just want to make sure that we're all connected. So everybody's here. So let's get started then. Thank you very much all for coming to this webinar. I mean, this is kind of the life we live these days. We live in webinars, not meetings. This is the subject of the day is the 2030 target. And it has a subtitle, Public Consultation. Initially, the initial thought was the fact that there is a public consultation going on, so we wanted to talk about that. We then realized that we didn't want to get you all into the details of all the elements, which is a fairly thick public consultation document. So we thought that we'll just get into a conversation, because in most of these meetings, people make statements and make presentations, and in general, you end up not having a discussion. Now, climate neutrality, for just as a quick recap, put forward in 2018 was the Green Deal, concretized in December 2019. Now, one of the key elements, of course, is the 2050 neutrality. Now, this 2050 neutrality implies that we will be doing a lot more in what's left into 2050 than we've done in the last few decades, 4 decades, which means a very accelerated decarbonization. I don't necessarily know all the figures, but all I know is also that the shorter the time, the more steep the curve, and that becomes unreasonable at some point. So I think that what we're looking at is an effort to rebalance, and an effort to come up with a climate target for 2030, which is more stringent than the 2030 minus 40% that we have right now, and in order to have a more gradual and more realistic reach in the 2050 target of net zero. We started with the target with the inception input assessment, and that inception assessment was put forward in March. There was a feedback period, and now there's a public consultation. In the feedback process, which lasted until April 15, there were the long and the short of 1,093 feedback. I am not sure how that stands in the grand scheme of feedbacks. I don't have that history, and maybe I should have looked at it. We all know that how many hits people get on websites and so on, but in the case, I don't know, but I suspect that it is a large number. On March 31st, the Commission launched the public consultation to June 23rd. Like everybody else, probably a lot of people around this table or around this Zoom, preparing for our input into the public consultation. Today was the deadline for the amendment to the climate law in the ENVI committee to be voted in September. The report for Ms. Guteland has multiple elements. The 2030 target is 60%, the budget. I am a child of the Kyoto Protocol to some degree, so when I hear budget, my ears go up right away. So quite an interesting time. The Council continues working on its position, and now we're switching to the German presidency very, very shortly. So with this background, we've assembled a group of panelists that are very known to all of you and very knowledgeable and people that have something to say about this topic. Adam Gibor Czertowiecki, who's the Deputy Minister in the Polish Ministry of Climate. He has been part of the Polish team dealing with climate change as long as I know, and I've been around for a while. You know, he's played one of the key roles in the COP in Warsaw and before. Peter Liese, the European Parliament member in the ENVI committee, CDU member, and he is, I'm told, a medical doctor, which I didn't know. So Peter, there's something new that I learned today. Monika Morawiecka, CEO of PGE Baltica, part of the PGE Electricity Group in Poland, former director of the strategy department in PGE, now responsible for construction of the first offshore winds in the Baltic Sea. Daniele Agostini, head of low carbon and European energy policies in the Enel Group, broad responsibility, policy analysis, and corporate position for the 30 countries in which the Enel Group operates. Used to do a lot of travel, now it does a lot of Zoom, I think, Daniele. And of course, last but by no means least, and thank you also, Holger, for joining us. Holger Losch, the member of the BDI Executive Board since 2011, Deputy Director General of the BDI since April 2017. So this is a very, I would call it very powerful, very influential, very well-informed group. The way we chose to do this is to kind of go and ask a first and a second round of questions, then give the opportunity for a discussion among you. And those people that are on the as participants, they for the moment have no video or no sound. We have godlike powers. People will have to raise their hand, their electronic hand, and we'll see them. And at that point, they'll be given the right to come on video and audio and ask a question. We'll urge people not to get into very long statements, but rather get to the point and ask questions. So I'll start with Adam. Adam, the European Council is working hard on this. Can you describe what is the work right now in the Council? Is the Council ready for September with regard to the climate law proposal? Is this something that is moving forward? It's always a little bit of, kind of tea leaves, and we try to read the tea leaves. How would you characterize that?
So I think that, in the strange times where we're going through, I'm actually surprised at how efficiently the discussions are moving forward in the Council, and member states sharing their thoughts on the main issues in the proposal. So I think this is moving very nicely. First of all, I want to thank you very much for inviting us to share a few thoughts on the process, and I'd be happy to say a few words on the European climate law and the climate discussion moving forward. I think indeed the September deadline is key for several reasons, because of the votes that are foreseen in the Parliament on the European climate law, but also because the Commission has announced they will present their impact assessment for the 2030 targets. And I think this impact assessment obviously is going to be very key, especially in the new reality that we have today, and the crisis we are facing in connection with the pandemic, to get a proper picture of where do we stand in the different sectors, and how much can we do. It will be very critical then for the impact assessment to be looking at the impact, not just very generally as is done most of the time, but also in looking at the impact on specific sectors and specific regions. I think in particular in this time, it's important that we make sure that the proposals we will design will not create an additional burden for in particular, the poorest citizens, the most vulnerable ones that are already, facing difficult economic times, and we should not design measures that will represent an additional burden for the citizens or for the sectors, the companies that are caught in this turmoil. So obviously, these new circumstances will have to be taken into account when designing the instruments. I think, and this, connecting this decision on the 2030 with the discussion we are having on the European climate law, that it's very important to look, beyond the discussion about the target itself, to look at what exactly do we need to put in place to reach that target, both in terms of legislative measures, but also in terms of financing that will be key to deliver on this level of ambition. I think we have a bit of tendency in Brussels to waste a lot of time and energy on discussing a theoretical target and not spending enough time on the practicalities of what do we need to do to reach that target. And I think this discussion on how to reach that target is becoming even more important now that we are getting closer to climate neutrality. Because when you're at the very beginning of the road, you can assume everybody does something different in their own member state, and somehow you'll be able to reduce by 10% or 20%. But once you get into the higher percentages, it's very difficult to do something unilaterally in your member state without having a coordinated action at EU level in terms of, again, innovation, standards, financing for these actions. And in order to get to climate neutrality, we will also need to be looking at actions across all sectors, obviously. So that is obviously a big challenge, and I don't think that we can reasonably say, if we want to get to climate neutrality, that reductions in that sector can wait for later. We really have to look at what needs to happen. The pace at which we evolve in the different sectors may be different, but I think we cannot assume that we can spare the efforts of reducing emissions in any sectors. We really need to act in all sectors. And maybe a final comment in this discussion. I think it's also important to look at the global dimension, obviously, of our action and what our partners are doing in the world. It is in particular in the context of the stringency of the measures we want to take. We need obviously to ensure that we maintain the competitiveness of our economy, not just for the employment growth and economy in the EU, but just for also the well-being of our citizens and the ability to provide for a good future for Europeans. It's important to ensure the competitiveness of our economy and to ensure that the actions we are taking in Europe are not unilateral actions, but that they're actually followed by our partners in the world. There are several instruments that we've been using in the past, and the Commission has indicated they want to look into a carbon border adjustment mechanism that could help ensure that the efforts we are doing in the EU are not resulting in increasing imported emissions from third countries. I was looking at very interesting scientific analysis from a couple of years ago that was looking at this issue of imported emissions, and I realized that if you were looking at the case of Sweden, for example, 2/3 of the emissions reductions they had done since 1990 had actually been compensated by increased imported emissions. So if we continue down that route and don't have efficient measures to ensure that we avoid importing emissions through our consumptions, then our policies will fail. So I think that's in a nutshell a few comments on these issues, but happy to get into the discussion and answer questions later on.
I am not a lawyer, but you opened a lot of doors, Adam, and I'm I always wanted to when I finish with my climate change career to become a host talk show at night like Johnny Carson. I never made it. Maybe now is my chance. But coming to Peter Liese now. Peter, the Environment Committee has been discussing the climate law proposal. Now, the one thing that fascinates me is the fact that you got this 2030, 2050 play that has to come into somehow, whether it's going to come as part of the law, is going to come up as amendment. But the question is this enough, having a 2050 target, or do you need to have budgets? Do you need to have intermediate targets, sectoral targets? How do you think the Parliament will be ready by September, October? What's your reaction? Because this is, look, we've met in the past, and I've known you since I've been in Brussels, where I came for 6 months, and I've been for 10 years. So you know where the bodies are. You've been around this file for many years. Peter.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation, and hello everybody. If you allow, I would start by referring our topic to the biggest crisis that Europe ever experienced, the Second World War, the Corona pandemic, because we cannot decouple the two debates. But of course, I'm not for an easy answer, but I think we should all discuss what are the real consequences now. We have the biggest economic crisis in Europe since the Second World War. And I think people that say, oh, we have this crisis only because politics overreacted on the virus, that's the debate now in Germany at least, I guess also in some other countries, they are completely wrong. We have a very dangerous virus. When I was in Brussels for a longer meeting, I came to the Parliament 3 weeks ago for one debate, but the last normal meeting was in the 10th, 11th of March. We all spoke about Italy. Nobody spoke about Spain. But 2 weeks later, in Madrid, all the hospitals were overcrowded and 10,000 people died, mainly in the region of Madrid, but in all Spain. So this is only one example how dangerous it is and how fast it can go. And another example is the UK. Boris Johnson underestimated the threat, and he reacted only 10 days later than the rest of Europe, but he has more people dying than Italy now. So there is a huge problem, which forced us to limit the economy, and still forces us to limit some economic activities. Not all the harm for the economy is made by government decision. And I'm a bit angry, for example, that those that never had a ban, like the German car industry, they stopped production voluntarily. They are now getting support, while others that were forced to close don't get the support. But anyhow, so the question is now how this reflects to our debate. And I think for me it's clear, and here I guess I'm together with Mr. Lösch from the BDI, that we should be even more careful now putting burdensome legislation on industry. So when we speak about climate, we need to do it efficiently and with the least possible burden. And over-ambitious targets are also to be treated very carefully, because we are in a huge crisis, and we may kill some of the enterprises that just survived Corona, but they are in difficulties, and climate policy that is not respecting economic needs may kill the rest of the economy. But on the other end, what is also very clear, we need to listen to science in the corona pandemic, and we need to listen to science when it comes to climate. Trump and Bolsonaro are the worst examples. They are no role model for anyone in corona and in climate policy. And if we, what I think most of us hope, have another president in the United States, the end of the year, European Union must be ready. We need to have a plan for increased ambition under the Paris Agreement. And at least in my country, and I guess in many others, we have public support for this. There was a survey that the majority of Germans still think climate change is a bigger threat than the economic crisis or the coronavirus. And unfortunately, I cannot say that they are wrong. And the crisis has taught us, you mentioned it, many people here in the conference normally are flying over the world every day. Now we are doing video conferences, and I think this is something we need to continue also after the crisis. I'm happy to meet all of you personally, but not all the meetings need to be in person. That's why one consequence is very clear for me. The recovery plan must be a green one. So it's not allowed, in my view, it's morally not allowed to spend money on old industry or not climate-friendly solutions. When it comes to the climate law and our discussion in the committee, I think it was clear before the crisis, it's even more clear now that 65% isn't the way to go. We will not support it as EPP. And I don't agree with those that say 65% is a natural consequence of Paris. So first of all, in Paris, we notified the 40%, but even Jutta Gutteland argues that to reach the 1.5 degree target, Europe's contribution needs to be 65%. This is disputed, but to be honest, there is no 1.5 degree target as a standalone target in Paris. I'm convinced that we all did a good job, and finally we achieved the 2 degrees. So that's why arguing with 1.5 without looking at the rest of the world, as the previous speaker said, isn't really helpful. That's why I stick to the Commission proposal of 50 and or 55%. And this will be challenging enough. You know, in Germany, we have a debate. Let's increase the European target because the German national target is anyhow at 55%. So their solution is very easy. Bulgaria, Romania, Poland should also go to 55% national target, and then we are there. But we all know that it's unrealistic. Member states are not able to be so ambitious, and they won't be. Only if we throw a lot of money at them, and this money is rather limited now. Though. So let's be a bit more realistic. And I think the most realistic approach is to follow the Commission in their targets and not to look at too many sector-specific targeted legislation, but to focus on the ETS. The current ETS needs to be strengthened. For example, we need to eliminate immediately all the certificates from the coal phase out in Germany and other countries. And we need a separate ETS for transportation and for building, because this would avoid the debate on increased national targets under the effort sharing. It would be fair, it would be targeted, it would be efficient, and it would also create additional money to help those sectors and those countries that need the most support. So, and I think we owe the young generation a sustainable concept, even especially when we do so many deaths in this crisis. We need to invest in the future. That is true for the recovery plan, but that's also true for the climate law. We need to ensure that we limit climate change, and that is possible with an ambitious European policy, but it's also important that we take other partners like China and hopefully the US after the election on board for real global effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Rushing now to, I'd like to have a bit of a conversation. Monika Morawiecka, you are working hard to put offshore wind farm in the Baltic. Polish power industry. I'm a guy from the electricity industry. I spent 20 years of my life in the electricity industry, different country, but I understand the electricity. But typically, the Polish power industry has been very concerned about these things. Now you are representing a new thrust for the Polish power industry. How do you react to this 2030 target and the climate law? What's your reaction as a stakeholder? In the end, you are a stakeholder in this.
Right. Thank you very much, Andrei, and thank you, first of all, for inviting me to this webinar. Yes, and thank you. I can now react to what's been said before, what makes our webinar maybe more interactive. First of all, let me say that it is not very often that we at PGE agree with what has been said from a member of the ENVI committee. So I'm very happy. I'm very happy with what I heard today from Peter here, because we largely share the views that have been just presented, maybe with some, of course, deviations from the details. But well, first of all, let me just briefly start from the top. I'm representing a newly created subsidiary within the PGE group, PGE being the largest power producer in Poland, and heavily coal-based, as the whole Polish power mix is still, unfortunately. And we at PGE have communicated already quite clear strategic direction, which is unequivocally going away from coal within a rational timeframe, I'd say, and that is before 2050, for PGE at least, for our fleet, and heavily investing in renewables. And this side of heavily investing in renewables, I'm representing with our offshore investment. This will represent quite a big chunk of a current total ambition of the Polish government to have at least 8 gigawatts installed capacity in offshore wind by 2040. I'm looking here at Mr. Czetwertyński. Hopefully this target will be raised, because I think that the potential might be a bit higher actually. But out of these 8 gigawatts current ambition, PGE is developing, PGE alone is developing 3.5 gigawatts of offshore wind. And the first of these farms are able to come online in the next 6 years. So we do have a clear strategic direction. What we are afraid of really in this transition, which we are planning for and we are determined to achieve, is really almost just one thing only, and this is financing available, especially for a company like ours, because we have 2 challenges at the same time. The first challenge is keeping our coal fleet until it's able to be closed from strategic point of view, meaning security of supply point of view, keeping it alive, and having this burden of higher CO2 prices is not making it an easy task. And at the same time, investing huge amounts of money, because we all know that the renewables are really capital intensive technologies, even, of course, although that we have technology on our side now, meaning the cost of these technologies have gone down quite significantly recently, and it is becoming affordable for countries like Poland to invest in those technologies. And this is primarily why we have made such a big shift really in our strategic view, that it's no longer, we've always been saying to ourselves and to the world, we cannot afford to invest in renewables, they are too expensive. Now we can say we cannot afford not to invest in renewables. So that's a complete change in perspective, thanks to the technology development. So coming back to the climate law and the Green Deal and all of that, I fully agree that first of all, we definitely need to take into account the COVID situation. You know, even on the broader scale, on the impact on the whole economy, there will be some debate on that between the economists and policymakers for some time, at least from now. So since we cannot expect this to be finalized very soon, we cannot also expect to have a final view on the possibilities and the options on the energy policy table. So I think really this impact assessment that has been talked about, we talked about earlier, it has to include the view on the COVID situation, and it might need to be revised in a few months later, because this is still developing. We still don't know whether we're going to have a second wave or not. Hopefully not, of course, but there is the crisis is not over yet. So it would be probably premature to jump into conclusions and to throw the targets or raise the targets without really stepping back and seeing what's really happening there. I do fully agree that we should have the recovery plan green. That's undisputable, I think, from our side too, and we definitely support that. We definitely support the view that the targets have to be realistic. I would also add to this that the impact assessment should be done not only across sectors, but also, and we've always been asking for that, never getting it. I'm not sure why, really, that we never got an impact assessment from the Commission split on particular member states. Because when you look at the member states level, then you can devise the tools and the financing tools to help these member states that are mostly affected or more affected than others, or have higher goals to achieve than others, to really help them achieve them. So impact assessment not being done on the member states level, for me, is a bit flawed, really. And only one reservation that I do have about strengthening the ETS. I do believe ETS is working well, and looking at our example, even now, with these prices, with these ETS prices that we have now and we've had for a few years now, and we are already taking a step. We are already making this big shift. So we don't really need anything more than that to compel us or to force us or to entice us to do the things that we are already planning to do. It would only put a higher burden on us financially and suck the resources, the financial resources that we would otherwise be able to put forward to renewables investments. Because honestly, a higher CO2 price means huge windfall profits for some and huge costs for others, and these others have a higher ambition to reach these renewable goals and have a lower starting point to reach them from. So these are my points for the beginning now.
We'll come back, Monica. Now, Daniele, we've known each other for a while, and I hear Monica saying this is a new branch of PGE. Reminds me a little bit of Enel Green Power a few years back. How does Enel react to the Green Deal, and how do you look at this, if you want, this recovery package? Is it green enough? Is it what's been put forward? The next generation EU, is this package green enough for you? I mean, you are one of the utilities that has really went very, very far and very, very quickly, not only in Europe, but around the world in promoting renewable energy.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to thank the Roundtable for organizing a very important debate. Our reaction to the Green Deal is actually a very positive one. It's positive mainly because our expectations is that things are going to happen quicker than anybody thinks. It's just going to be increasing acceleration of the rhythm and the rate of decarbonization. If we look at the past 10 years, this it's always been accelerated and upgraded the targets. We never went back. And we see an acceleration because more and more people start to see a convergence of different policy areas in terms of how quickly we need to go to zero emissions, not only to decarbonizing, but zero emissions. And it's areas like air quality. We've seen a big push of air quality considerations in decarbonizing transport. We've seen a big push at decarbonization from security supply issues. We're today seeing a great push from the economic dimension. So in that sense, we very much welcome the Green Deal. We think, as I think Adam very rightly put it, we can't just focus on where we need to go. We all know we need to go to zero by 2050. It's how we get there. We actually think that the increased ambition is welcome. There are, of course, it's a question of finding the right path. And when we look at the economic recovery plan, we think it's a good one. It's going in the right direction. However, more and more often, financing is an issue, but it's not the only issue. Today, if we look at our significant renewable investment plans, they are being bottlenecked, for instance, by slow administrative procedures and permitting. You cannot have renewable energy plants that need a 5-year permitting process if we are accelerating at the scale at which we're accelerating. The other big bottleneck is infrastructure. Until recently, we could live with today's infrastructure, but today, the scale at which technology is changing and renewables need to get deployed require a leap forward in the way we deploy our infrastructure and the way our infrastructure works in terms of digitalization. The third area, of course, is looking further down, is down at the consumption level. So generation, infrastructure key, the consumption level, we need to think drastically differently. We need to think of how to change our products. I look at the electricity sector. We've gone from having an electron that is being produced with coal to having an electron that is going to be increasingly green. We see new products that are, for instance, storage that we're deploying, demand side response, completely different products for the electricity sector. The same is slowly happening in the transport sector, where the business models are changing, and in the construction sector, slowly but steadily, they're getting onto the path. Now, what is missing in all of this, we like to say, is we're convinced that the targets are achievable in terms of course, the environment is an imperative. The economics today are there if we do take the right action on the administrative permitting procedures, on the infrastructure, and on changing the mindset of people in conceiving production. What today we're missing is the third leg of the sustainable development imperative. So we got environment, economic, we're missing the social leg, the social dimension, the just energy transition that does not leave anybody behind. I think the European Green Deal that was launched by the Commission very much goes in the right direction and finally bringing fully on board third dimension, which is key. And now the question is, how do we get those actions out to the people, to the actors who are supposed to implement them? And there are two actors. One, of course, are the consumers and the citizens that we've talked about earlier in changing their production patterns and their production mentality. And the other one are the companies that need to get on board and really be supported in their transformation from brown to green. We cannot talk anymore about creating green jobs. We need to make sure that the brown jobs are converted in green jobs. And then we're doing this throughout our operations, from generation down to retail. We're taking people from our renewable energy, from our coal plants, we still have some, and putting them to work on renewables. Within our grids, we're doing the same thing. We're trying to expand that to the supply chain, but this process needs to go wider and really be taken full on by policymakers at all levels, not only at the European level, at the national level, but even more at the regional and local level. So I think I'll leave it to that for the sake of time and making sure that we have a good discussion after this.
Yeah, I think that's important. Now, Holger Losch, we had a few good discussions in Berlin a while ago. Glad that you could make it. Now, BDI has done one of the most detailed study that I know in decarbonization, and reaching 80-95%. I think at that point was about 95%, was about zero. So you've done your homework, in a very, very serious way. What's your reaction? I mean, in terms of the 2030 target, how does it fit with the climate law, and whether some of the things that have been mentioned in terms of doing assessment, impact assessment at the various member state levels, and so on. What's your reaction to this, Holger?
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, thank you for inviting me for this webinar, and I'm very glad to join. So, well, from our perspective, of course, I have to repeat what some of our participants already mentioned. That I think Corona is going to change a lot of things, a lot of policy plans. It's going to change a lot of private plans, a lot of company plans, and it would be a big surprise if it wouldn't have any impact on the climate policy agenda of the EU. Of course, we will see public budgets, we will see company budgets, we will see private people's money dwindling. This is very sure that we will have a very limited or a more limited capability of many people and institutions to invest and to spend. This is what we already see in Germany and other countries. So people go to shops just for the sake of not being bored, but they don't buy a lot. So there is going to be a much harder environment for what we found out in our study is eventually necessary to get to these higher levels of defossilization, 80, 95, and now carbon neutral. And what we need there the most is additional money to invest on all levels. And so, first of all, I think the job we have to do has just becoming much harder than it already was before. Does this mean, and this is what I get asked in many discussions now, does this mean that we all go back to brown, to quote Daniele now, and just do the brown stuff and do like we always did? I don't think that's a real rational working in the industry. So industry on many levels has embarked on this path to modernization, a very general path of modernization. And to put it bluntly, I don't think that if governments would do nothing and just give money to companies, these companies would build a lot of coal power plants. So I don't think there is how do you say, intentional drop back into old and very fossil technologies. We have so many regulations, so many laws, so many business plans and commitments of companies. I don't think that we are going to go away from this modernization path if the governments don't steer it that way. So this path has been stepped on, and then I think we have to go further on this path. The question how efficient we do this and how we can use the obviously limited money and investment means we have. I think that's the great question, which are really changing, of course, the Green Deal. So I dare to change the name, and in an interview, and I said probably we need a smart deal now, bringing together the aspects of the Green Deal together with the recovery plans and together with other plans Europe and our policymakers have. So it means employment, it means growth, of course, and social rest, not unrest, as we see in the United States. But we think that it's probably a new game, and probably, I would say, I'm not very sure if raising the bars now from 40 to 55 or even 65 should go without a very, very careful impact assessment in the light of what is now happening to our economies in the light of Corona. I'm not sure, or I'm very sure we haven't seen yet how deep these things are going. We haven't seen yet how much this is doing to employment. We have some polls from from small and medium-sized companies, and their a two-thirds majority says they are expecting 10 to 20% employees less at the end of the year in their companies. We have 45 million employees in Germany. I just don't want to calculate this for the whole of Germany. So there might be some more difficult times ahead, and I really would what Adam said. We have to be very careful, but we don't have to stop and go back on some ways. But we have to look where we put the money best. So raising bars or displaying even more flashy targets has been a mean of German and European politics for many, many years. But I would say the capability of displaying or showing up the instruments and the measures to make this practical, and somebody talked about practicality of all of these targets, this hasn't been as flashy as the target pronunciation has been in the last time. So my questions are many. So what about ETS? What about the effort sharing? Are we going to put this together at some point? There we might have many questions, because we fear that if you put the mobility sector and the building sector into the existing ETS, this could really be not to the advantage of industry. Other things which we are talking about is what with all these other ordinances for cars and buildings and everything. So basically the question is the regulation, this construction of very complex regulations for climate protection. Is this still the instrument we think we're gonna go or reach the target in the most efficient manner? And well, when we did our study, as you mentioned, there were a few points which were very important for us finding. First of all, of course, it's about alternatives for companies, countries, and consumers. So you have to provide people with alternatives. These alternatives, unfortunately, can be seen in some parts very clearly, and they are there and they are visible economically. In other parts, we are a little bit apart from visibility. The second thing is, what about carbon leakage protection? I mentioned carbon adjustment, border adjustment measures. So is this going to be in addition to existing carbon leakage instruments, or is this going to be the only means of protecting us from lower level emission in other competitive countries? And is this perhaps a new source of budget money for the EU carbon border adjustment tax? Because this would, of course, have several implications. What about EU state aid? I gratefully acknowledge that Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Macron, in their joint statement, talked about something I've been talking a lot about. How can we transform eventually the EU state aid law into a means, into a tool of transformation? Can this be done? I know this is a discussion which is in Brussels going on. And then for other tools, what about contracts for difference? Is this going to be national instruments? Are these going to be European instruments? How can we make them comparable? And so on. So there are many questions, and I would say we clearly see the path of modernization. And I don't think anybody in industry, really not anybody, is envisioning a fossil heavy near, medium, or long-term future for our economies. I don't see that. Question is always the timing. Question is the financing. Question is the flexibility we need, and this is why we are strictly against sectoral annual budget solutions. And where will all these, or how will these investments be incentivized? And after Corona, this is going to be much harder, but we should really try to bring together the the recovery and the modernization. And I don't think that has to be a contradiction per se. It's going to be more difficult, but it could be possible.
Thanks, Holger. Look, I think that what we'll do is I'd like to just very briefly recap what I think I captured. There's quite a few people online, so if they want to speak, they should raise their hand. First, I'd like to give you the chance to react to each other's and enter into a conversation. What I caught is that everybody seems to be in violent agreement about the fact that, as Holger said, we don't see a fossil-heavy future. It's all about the timing, the finance, the flexibility, what others are doing, and the fact that we are in the period after this coronavirus thing that will lead to competition for resources and attention. There is such a thing as competition for resources, finance, but also a certain level of attention that policymaker can give to different things at the same time. And again, anecdotally, we don't know how the economy is going to fall after this, but whether it is the 20% or number, I can't remember the number you mentioned, Holger, was going to be certainly a lot of people that will be in some difficulty. Adam, did you want to react? I thought the body language at least said that you wanted to maybe react, or am I wrong?
There is so many things I want to react on, but if I want to keep it short, maybe I'll say.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
I'd say three things. It's one of the disadvantages when you speak first. You realize that after the others have spoken, that you have forgotten a major point, and your silence might be misinterpreted. And I'm thinking here of the green recovery discussion, so I just want to underline that this is also an exercise that we've been looking at in the Ministry of Climate. How the investments that we need to undertake for the transformation of our energy sector and the transformation of our economy can be implemented quickly and can provide an answer you can provide an additional economic impulse in these difficult times, and how much there is of a synergy between the two efforts, the need for recovery and the need for transformation. So I think we are there fully aligned with that general reflection here. Two other points. First, on the discussion about at which speed we are moving, and the fact that we are in different situations. I made a short allusion to that, and then Peter commented also on the discussion that is happening in Germany. I must say that actually, when you look at the figures, it's not. I don't want to be doing finger pointing, but you mentioned Romania, Poland, or Bulgaria. It's not these countries that have the least reductions. Actually, these countries have some of the highest reductions in Europe since 1990. But there are some countries in Europe, in Western Europe actually, that have even increased emissions since 1990. So if you want to give that logic of everybody has to reach the same line at the same time, and then I think that it's other countries that are in a much more uncomfortable situation in this regard. But I do think this is not resolvable, and it is obviously understandable that countries are in different situations, and some have 100 meters to the finish line, and some have a whole marathon ahead of them, and you can't expect all the countries to reach climate neutrality at the same time. We actually did the exercise in Poland, looking at what would it mean in terms of Monika Morawiecka was talking about the ambition of PGE to be exiting coal before 2050. What would it mean if we were looking as being as ambitious as some other member states in terms of coal? If we were as ambitious as France, in terms of speed at which we exit from coal, we would be exiting from coal in 2700. If we were as ambitious as Spain in exiting from coal, we would be exiting coal in 2100. I think the only really ambitious countries in Europe in terms of this policy is actually Germany, and I need to recognize that. But even in that case, you know, Germany is starting from about half of the share of coal in their energy mix as we do, and they're taking 20 years to exit from coal. So we can assume that we would be taking 40 years, as that's taking already us beyond the deadline that PGE is looking at. So I think there's these difference in terms of situations and starting points are an obvious fact and need to be reflected in our policies. And finally, I want to make a comment on the financing. It was mentioned by a few speakers in the discussions. I think indeed the way our system is designed today is not really fully efficient at directing the investments where they are most needed, and we need to recognize that. It means that, you know, in this context also of you know, more difficult economically, more difficult times, where we will need to look especially at the impact of our policies on the most vulnerable citizens. We need to make sure that the way we design new mechanisms or distribution keys is really taking into account these considerations and can ensure that the investments that we need for the transformation of the European economy are really happening where they ought to be.
Peter, you signaled you wanted to come in. You're muted, Peter. Peter, you're muted.
Sorry,
there you go.
You can hear me. So sorry. I want to make a more clear what I think is the most important question. And anyone around who knows the answer or knows somebody who has the answer, tell me. The question is, what are the real effects of crisis on the climate policy? Because we have different effects. First of all, we have a emission reduction never seen before. I don't know if anyone has figures. We will have also a different life after Corona, less travel, more video conferences. But we have an economy that is really in danger. And maybe the capacity for industry to invest in new technologies is limited. And I don't know, the Commission has to take that into account. And I disagree with the friend from the Polish electricity company that we need to do 3, 4, 10 impact assessments. So clarity is also important. The decision needs to be done soon. Unfortunately, the majority in the ENVI committee thinks we don't need an impact assessment. They know already that 65% or at least 55% is the right answer. I disagree, but cannot wait for another year. We need all the brains should be put together to see what are the real effects of the crisis. And then a reaction on the previous speaker. It may not be a good news for the Polish government, but the EPP discussed the issue, and we think climate neutrality needs to be the target for everybody 2050 by the latest. Some member states are ready to do it faster. That's to be welcomed. But 2050 is the final date for us. And, you know, I see the challenge for Poland. That's why I strongly disagree with those that say for the 2050 target, it's for the 2030 targets, it's easy. We just need to take care that Poland has the same ambition than Germany. That is unrealistic. But 2050 is a long time, and climate neutrality is a must. And when you speak about Eastern European countries reducing their emissions, the main reason why Germany did it in the years between 1990 and let's say 2018 was the same reason that we overcame communism. Communism is the most inefficient form of the economy. They produce a lot of emissions and not really quality goods. And the reason that we overcome communism is an advantage for Germany, but it was also an advantage for many Central and Eastern European countries. When we look at the future, we need to be more forward-looking. So I agree with the two Polish speakers, and I was quite surprised that Polish electricity company agrees with a member of the ENVI committee, but I cannot hide the disagreement on these points. So also Poland needs to be more ambitious, and I think Polish society is getting more ambitious than 3-4 years ago.
Thanks, thank you, Peter. Daniele, I've heard a lot of yes, with the timing and the finance and the this and the that. You had caveat. Your caveats were different. The caveats were more in terms of the regulatory and permitting and the infrastructure and things of that sort. What's your reaction to this discussion? Because again, people came after you and then further reaction.
Yes, just a quick reaction on the impact of the current crisis on the path ahead. I think we shouldn't, I think it's a very important crisis. I think obviously we need to think through of how it's going to impact, how it's going to influence. However, we need to get used to the fact that the world is changing. The world is changing constantly. We do not know whether this crisis will be V impact or L impact. So it's going to reduce structurally consumption. It's going to be a U, how long it's going to be. What we do need to know is we need to have economic systems and policy to support them that are resilient to change, that are able to dynamically adapt to the change, to the crisis, and support the national economic, regional economic systems in changing. So we cannot wait to understand what the impact of the crisis is. No, we need to go forward and build rules and a system that is able to move along, because today it's the coronavirus, tomorrow will be a technology breakthrough, the day after tomorrow will be another financial crisis, who knows? So I think we need to get in the sense of dynamically managing policy rather than hoping to. And that's why I was moving in the direction that I think often there is finance out there, but I think the economic recovery plan is a very good one because it mobilizes quite a bit of finance. The question is that finance being used in an efficient and an effective way? And I think maybe Peter just mentioned that is, are we directing, or maybe Adam, are we directing it in the right direction? Now the investments go there where the infrastructure, be it the digital infrastructure, be it the electricity infrastructure, be it the regulatory infrastructure, actually make these investments happen. Often today, a lot of low carbon investments do not happen because there's an issue in terms of infrastructure, of regulation, or there's also an issue in terms of going from innovation to deployment, to actually doing the deployment of that innovation. And the US is a lot better than us in actually making sure that the new innovative models get laid out. So I think in order to make sure that that these investments to come out of the crisis are actually a long-term investments for our future, we need to make sure that the supporting system, the supporting policy-making system, and I include again the administrative, the innovation and the regulatory, are fit for the purpose of dynamically managing changes, including crises like this one.
Listen, I will go to Eva Krukowska because we have two polls now. I bring in the third poll in. But before I do that, I want to go to Holger and Monica because basically, Daniele, you're saying, okay, there's always going to be another crisis. Some people will say, don't never let a good crisis go to waste. But the point you're making is there's always going to be another crisis. We got to do something. These guys are saying, yeah, okay, but you know, I mean, kind of going at 65% now is just not going to work. How do you react to this discussion, Holger? Because there's obviously, you know, everybody said, yeah, in the long term, we're all brothers, and in 2050, we're all brothers. But before we get to 2050, I don't know how you say this, the saints will kill us before we get to God.
yeah, there's another saying, in the long term, we are all dead. I think this is what I meant with timing. Of course, we all know where we want to go, but we have to acknowledge that there is a way we have to walk on to get there, and this way is having difficulties. And I would agree with Daniele that it's very much a question of, are we having the right form of regulation, the right way of incentivization? Are we technology open and market-minded enough to accept that some people go on paths we might, for some reasons, not like, and perhaps we see them succeed, fine. Perhaps we see them fail, fine, also. So I think that this is a very, I think what we do is too much driven from the perspective how we envision in detail a technology future to happen. So there are different ways to get there, and I think we should accept that. I want to emphasize another point. In my view, we are focusing too much on the only on the electricity. Germany's Energiewende is by large just a electricity wende for this time being, and I've been very active in promoting to look at the other 80% of the primary energy consumption we have, which we today feed with oil, gas, so with fossil fuels, and we imported it. Germany is importing 90% of this 80% molecules we need for our primary energy consumption. And I don't think this is going to change 100%. We're not going to have 20% molecules and 80% electricity at some time. So we should more focus on how we get this, and I'm really serious with that. The renewable energy has developed in really the only chance we have to reach these targets one day. This has been very costly, especially for Germany. Fair enough, so enjoy. But it has developed in a real chance. But it's only going to work if we combine it with the molecule part. And there, in our German discussion, we have now the hydrogen discussion is starting. We have it in a very national manner, but I think it should be at least a European, but more a geopolitical discussion. But this is something we really have to look at as well. For the energy-intensive industry, we will never purely electrify them, and you need enormous amounts of carbon-free fuels, gases, and electricity, much more than Germany can ever produce on its own. So this is something we really have to take into consideration and not only look on this. For me, it's really too much look on the electricity side only. This is something I think the European Commission has started to look at, but it's the larger part of the renewable molecule part.
Monica?
Yes, thank you. It's just very briefly, because I know we have some questions from the audience, so we should probably get on with them. But again, on the coming out of the crisis, I do not share the view that it's either this crisis or the other, and it's always be a crisis, because this type of crisis we haven't experienced in our lifetimes sitting here. So I think it is an unprecedented crisis, and it has to be dealt with accordingly. So I do think it has to be taken into account, definitely. And it will, whatever we say probably here on this webinar, it will be taken seriously. But I think the real question is how to really, and we talked about it, how to really direct smart investments. Smart meaning the ones that do not contribute to worsening, but contribute to recovering. And also coming back to the social dimension that Danielle mentioned before, this is very important that these investments contribute not to, putting much more burden. On the contrary, lessening the burden on the society, on the companies, on the citizens. For example, investing in cheap renewables is this type of investment. Investing in building insulation is this type of an investment that not only does not put a bigger burden on the consumer, but relieves the burden from the consumer because the heating costs will go down. So these type of investments we have to think about, and this really is more about getting it done and just and I would definitely agree the permitting and administrative processes would have to be streamlined, and this is really a headache for many investors. I speak from experience here as well. So it really is a question of doing the right thing, and I think the Green Deal and the recovery project packages is putting forward good proposals in that.
Let me go to Eva Kukowska from Bloomberg. Eva, if you want to unmute yourself. Eva?
Yes, sorry, I'm here. So, hello. Basically, I have two questions. The first one would be to Peter Liese. I just wanted to ask you, Mr. Liese, if you really believe that creating new markets will be easier than renegotiating the principles of burden sharing. I understand that the CDU-CSU bloc is in favor of other countries doing more when it comes to the new targets, but I was just wondering if it's a viable option. And my second question would be to Holger Losch. And I wanted to ask you about the German presidency. What role do you see for Germany as the new presidency of the EU? It seems that you're urging caution, and I was wondering whether the industry in Germany is in favor of doing less than originally envisaged in the Green Deal because of the crisis. Thank you.
Peter?
Yeah, thank you, Eva, for these two questions. And I have the courage also to touch on the second one, because what the industry wants, Mr. Lösch should answer, but what the role of the German presidency is, I think it's very clear. Angela Merkel made her statement at the Petersburg dialogue when we already knew that we are in the corona crisis and we have economic problem, and she applauded to the proposal of the European Commission for the Green Deal, which means the German Chancellor supports. There is some tension in the German CDU-CSU group in the National Parliament, but they also agreed on a paper to support the Green Deal. The only question is how to get to the higher ambition. And there, I think, first of all, I think it is more realistic to work on European instruments. The ETS for transport and buildings is only one example, but I also think it's more appropriate. We need to be more European. We should have separate, completely different national strategies. The question of fairness and balancing out can be done inside the ETS, as we do in the existing ETS. There is transition of money from Germany to Poland because of the different situation, but there's the same target. And that, I think, is a long-term view that we should apply for all the sectors. And so it is more realistic, but I also think it's more fair and more just. And the last word to the German presidency, I know Ursula von der Leyen and I know Angela Merkel. And I'm completely sure that they talk a lot. Everybody knows that they talk a lot, and that Ursula von der Leyen wouldn't make any substantial, ambitious proposal when she knows that Angela Merkel is not behind this. So that's why I'm quite optimistic that the German presidency will support the European Commission. And that's why I think we can get quite a good substantial agreement on all the aspects that we are discussing.
Holger.
Yeah.
There was one question from Eva to you.
Yeah.
Is the BDI ambitious or not?
Well, first of all, I have asked my questions, and we have a lot of questions on the practicality and what it really means to raise the bars. And I think that's fair enough. We of course did some mathematical homework, and under the given conditions, well, we and not we alone would estimate that a 5% raise target in Europe for 2030 could translate into 68 to 70% 2030 target for Germany, and this would mean a 5-fold effort annually of the CO2 reduction, and I think it's fair enough to put a question mark there if this is really feasible, and if it's politically wanted to go that way, then we need some more and clearer answers on the instruments with which we, industry and consumers, will be enabled to go that way. Considering or looking at the EU presidency, I think, and that's not my estimate, I think that's probably common understanding. I think there are two big priorities, and first is how do we get from actual crisis help into a valuable recovery program, and the second priority is going to be the Brexit, which is, as we all know, going to happen some way or the other in this during this German presidency until the end of the year. And to my knowledge, these are going to be the two priorities, and all other questions probably due to resources, because one of the stuff has to be done by video conferencing. I don't know how far one presidency can go, touching or ticking all the boxes which are on the German agenda, on the European agenda. But in the recovery, of course, we will have questions of sustainable development, modernization, of course.
Look, I will take now a little bit the privilege of the chair. I don't see a lot of hands up, but I'm curious because a lot of this is premised on a border carbon adjustment at some point. So here we go about 50, 55, 65. I know it looked like a little bit of a bidding war. Now, isn't this very, how much in the council, how much in the parliament do you have a certainty that you can deliver on both? Because people are going to put these things together. So is this a conditioned precedent, as they say in contracts, or is not? I'm from the council and the parliament. Peter, what's your reaction? I mean, to me, I've heard many people in industry saying, yeah, but don't worry, the white hats are coming. The BCA is coming. We're going to be fine. How realistic is to have these two things? Are they disconnected? Are they connected? You're going to have to make a decision on 2030 right now, waiting for 2021 on the other one. How are these two things going together?
Yeah, I'm not so optimistic on the border adjustment. I think it's a good idea, and we need to look at it. We need to examine it, but it will not be the silver bullet, because first of all, we don't know if it is WTO compatible. We don't know how third countries will react. So maybe China will bring us all the steel that is produced environmental friendly and say, we are better than you, so no tax for this steel. The dirty steel they will produce, send to other countries or use in China. And also the question of steel used inside the European Union, you cannot look at all the products that are produced from steel. So we can look at it for some products. We need to do it careful. And to answer to Mr. Löw's question, I think in the end, when the border adjustment fully applies, we cannot do free allocation at the same time. But we cannot definitely get rid of the free allocation before we have a WTO-proof system that it really protects our industry. So we cannot put an experiment to our industry and say, okay, we abolish the free allowances and then let's see if the protection works in another way. So this is all not so easy. And that's why, yeah, in an ideal world, we could go to maybe even 60%. I still doubt 65% because this not only affects industry, it would affect every private household, every car driver. So I think we need to be careful. But even in industry, in an ideal world, we could be very pushy and say, restrict this target and then a border adjustment. But I'm not 100% sure that it works. So let's look at the Commission proposal and let maybe try with 1 or 2 specific products and then go step by step.
Any reaction from you, Adam?
Well, I can confirm that indeed I think it's likely that, and that's what the Commission announced as well, it will do, to progress step by step on the carbon border adjustment, and therefore it cannot be a silver bullet in the sense that we will not have an instrument that applies to all the sectors, to all the products starting in 2021, which we should have if we would want that to be an effective measure to protect our industry and to ensure the efficiency of our climate policy. So we'll probably need to be looking at a wide array of measures. I don't think that you need necessarily to exclude or that you can assume that free allocation and a carbon border adjustment are incompatible. You can design a carbon border adjustment mechanism that would be just on the delta between the amount of emission that is compensated by free allocation and the actual amount of emissions embedded in that product, and that would be WTO compatible and would be a carbon border adjustment. Obviously, it would be only on the delta and not on the full amount of carbon embedded in the product. But in theory, it's possible to design such a carbon border adjustment measure. I also wanted to comment once more on the fact that we need all to move at the same speed or different speeds. I think it's a very important element in that discussion. Indeed, is because it's a bit the impression I get sometimes when I hear some of these comments, like we need to all cross the finish line at the same time. I get a bit of the impression that some of the intention behind is to say, okay, I can wait and do nothing, do no reductions for me, and let the other run and do the reductions that are needed. And I think this would be obviously unfair. And if you continue, in the same way that that we have done the allocation of effort, it's already pretty easy to calculate what the different targets would be in the non-ETS sectors for member states, and you already know today, that raising the targets to 55% in the EU means a target in the ESR for the member states with the highest GDP of 65%. That's what it means.
I think that we are getting towards the end. There's a couple of questions that maybe somebody wants to pick up. One of them is about ever international linkage and going back to an international connection with international credit. Is there a point especially as we start thinking about carbon neutrality. Is this still an option? That's one question being raised. I'm not sure if anybody wants to pick up. The second thing that if anybody wants to pick up, and this is a little bit unfair maybe, but the first thing that you see people wanting to do, they want, coming out of this coronavirus, and, we've all kind of missed going and having a beer with friends and what have you. But the first thing that you see people wanting to go on vacation. And they want to go on vacation and get on the plane and go on vacation. That's pretty much what people want to do. I mean, it's reality, Daniele, I can tell you, I'm going to get on the first bloody flight to Rome and go back to Italy if I can help it. Now, so are you so sure that this decrease, which some people estimated at 20% decrease in emissions as a result of this crisis, is this, if we reach 20% in such a crisis, what exactly do we have to do to reach a lot more than that? How is that going to work? Do you think that the population in Europe understands that? Daniele? Yeah. Or Peter, you want to go first?
Yes. First, on the international credits, I don't think it's a good solution. I don't think it's a solution for 2050. It may be part of a compromise for 2030. Stretch the target too far, there may be no other alternative than to use international credits. But for me, it's important in the Paris Agreement, all parties have targets. So if there's a possibility for one other third party to do more than they have pledged in Paris, the first point should be that we ask everybody to increase ambition like Europe does. So we need a pledging process before Glasgow. No, Glasgow is 1 year later, but we need the pledging process as soon as possible all over the world. And assuming that we have a lot of room for maneuver, this is also a point when we come to aviation. The whole project of the ICAO, the CORSIA, is only based on the assumption that there are many, many stakeholders all over the world that are ready to do more than they pledged in Paris. But it's clear that that cannot compensate aviation. We need to use this space to increase ambition. That's one of my main concerns. And when it comes to 2050, finally, we need to be climate neutral in Europe. And that is clearly the assumption of the Commission. And I will defend this very much. But on the other hand, it's true what the participant wrote in the chat. Some industry may not be carbon neutral by 2050. I think anyhow it should be a target. But carbon neutral is for the society. So the things like sustainable managed forests are also an instrument to balance this. I think we shouldn't trust too much on international credits. On your question on vacation, so first of all, there was a survey in Germany. I don't know how it looks like in other countries that is speaking a completely other language than you did. Only 1% of the citizens are even considering traveling outside Europe, and only 13, so 1/3, are considering to do their vacation in another part of Europe than Germany. A relative majority wants to stay at home, and a majority of those, a big majority of those that go for vacation will stay in Germany. Maybe that will change in 2 years. But I'm definitely sure that we will have more video conferences after the crisis. And I really enjoy this situation where I can have at the same day a talk with Mr. Tedros from WHO, who is in Geneva, my colleagues in the German parliament, they are in Berlin, my constituents who here in North Rhine-Westphalia, and in Brussels. This is not possible without video conferencing. And that's an effect that we shouldn't underestimate. And also home office will increase, definitely. Sometimes you need to go to your workplace, but not 5 days a week. And there's a lot of innovation, technology will involve, and people are much more motivated. Even homeschooling will stay. A friend of mine is a teacher with elderly students. For the small students, it's difficult. But he told me that he's already finished with the whole stuff until the summer holiday because his students are more motivated. They don't sit on the bus 2 hours a day. They have this time for recreation and for studying. So there will be advantages. I wouldn't ignore the problems, but there are co-benefits that we can draw also for the climate after the new situation, and that will have an effect. I don't know, I'm not an analyst that can put all this together. If somebody is here or can work with the parliament and others on this, I would be happy, but there are these effects and they will sustain, I'm quite sure.
Daniela, you have the last word. You wanted to react a little bit to the first question on international stuff, I think.
Yeah, and also to the second one, but very briefly on the first one, I think it's imperative that the debate is opened again in Brussels on this. I think we've learned a lot from our first experience with using international credits. We've learned hard lessons because we know that not everything went well. But we also do know that we will need it eventually. And so this sort of limbo where it's there, but no one wants to talk about it. And carbon pricing at the UN is their only chapter has not been closed. It's a bit hypocritical. I want to make it clear that as Enel, we're not planning on using credits. We're going for zero emissions well before 2050. But we see it as part of the solution in terms of making sure that the ambition is there. So we do support having an open debate on that. On your second question, very briefly, I don't think it's going to be as difficult as people say. I mean, again, we believe in change and technological disruption. We see coal going out of the market very quickly and cutting emissions very rapidly. We're closing our coal plants in Italy, in Spain, in Chile, ahead of what we planned 3 years ago. And we're talking about in the next 5 to 6 to 7 years. So we think the change is going to be a lot faster. And that's where I was talking about making sure that we're ready for a world that is changing. Because if we can't close coal plants just because there's not enough demand side response and batteries out there to actually catch the renewable energy, then we have a problem. And so that we need a system that is able to change. If we can't close a coal plant because it takes 6 years to actually turn the site into something else, because we cannot build renewable energy on a coal site because the permit is long and it's easier to do it on a green field, then it's a problem. So then my answer to you again is we can do those cuts very quickly. They have happened in the electricity sector. We know there will happen in the transport sector because of the air quality drive as well. And we just need to be equipped for that very rapid change, especially on the social side.
Very good. Look, somebody said, I don't think we're going to make the decisions here today, but I think that it's always useful to have an exchange of views and hear different views around the table. I think there was enough variety of views that make the discussion valid. As a think tank, the most important thing for us, somebody said, like Daniela said, we got to have an open mind and have an open discussion on all the issues. I don't think we should keep an ideological close mind and start. I think, Peter, you mentioned some of your colleagues already decided what the result of the impact assessment is before the impact assessment. So I want to thank you all for taking the time. I hope you found it useful. I hope the audience found it useful. And we'll continue to do our work. I think that we are working into a new kind of paradigm, more difficult in many ways. But from our point of view, the fact that we know many of you is helping and meeting new people like Monica, and wanted to thank you all again for being here today. With this, I'd like to bring this to a close, and you'll hear from us in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.